Are you the strongest because you're Satoru Gojo, or are you Satoru Gojo because you're the strongest? These were the words uttered by Suguru Geto outside of the infamous KFC during what I consider to be one of the most important scenes in Jujutsu Kaisen. It was the line that sent Gojo into an existential spiral and made him question his own identity, his place in the world, and ultimately his own existence. The true meaning of Geto's words is seemingly lost on a lot of people who don't follow JJK. What did Geto really mean, and why do these words impact Gojo so much? And if you read the title of the video, how does Sukuna fit into all this? Well, if you stick around with me, I hope to be able to explain to you why Gojo and Sukuna are the only sorcerers in Jujutsu Kaisen who are capable of understanding each other, and how their stories are thematically resonant with one another. Also, there is no way that I can make this video without going into manga spoilers, so this is your first and only warning for all of JJK. And so, without further ado, let's first try to understand the man who changed the course of Jujutsu society by simply being born. Satoru Gojo. Satoru Gojo was born on a pedestal. As the only wielder of the six eyes and the curse technique known as Limitless, Gojo was destined to become the reigning strongest sorcerer in existence. Without having a single say in the matter and without even trying, Gojo took the title of the strongest sorcerer in the modern day. The story makes it clear to us how effortlessly Gojo accomplishes things, how easily everything comes to him, and how arrogant this has made him. However, this arrogance did not come from the sheer privilege that Gojo was born with. He fundamentally views everyone else as being weaker than him because it's a fact. To Gojo, being the strongest is a state of being. It is who he is, and there is nothing he or anybody else can do to change that. The outcome of every battle he's ever had in his life has always been the same: overwhelming victory. There was nothing and no one in the world that could even come close to touching him, both figuratively and literally. In the context of Jujutsu society, Gojo was essentially a god. Throughout the heavens and the earth, I alone am the honored one. This line sums up Gojo's view of himself. The line itself is an allegory to Buddhist literature, with the Buddha having said this very line upon being born according to Buddhist scripture. This isn't the first Buddhist reference that Gege Akutami has made regarding Gojo, since his birthright power is known as the Six Eyes, which is based on the six paths of rebirth or reincarnation in Buddhism. All of this reinforces the idea that Gojo stands at a precipice beyond what any other person in Jujutsu society could hope to ever achieve. His six eyes allow him to perceive the world beyond what normal humans can comprehend, and his limitless makes him untouchable. The moment that he stated that he was the honored one, Gojo entered a state of enlightenment, a state that he himself knows that no one else could ever relate to. While enlightenment can feel euphoric and peaceful, it is what ultimately causes his unending loneliness. After Gojo achieved enlightenment, it became impossible for him to connect with anybody else equally. This became truly evident to him outside of a certain fried chicken restaurant during the most dramatic breakup of 2023. This takes us back to that iconic line: are you the strongest because you're Satoru Gojo, or are you Satoru Gojo because you're the strongest? To understand why this line rocked Gojo to his core, let's briefly consider what it's like to be a celebrity, to be the biggest star in the world, and to have everything at your disposal. Once you reach the point where you have so much fame, power, and influence, the person you used to be is swallowed up by that fame. Ordinary people can't see past the fame, and the world stops treating you as a person, but rather as the image of what they see of you. It is incredibly isolating having the world view you as nothing more than your celebrity status. The people you interact with put you on a pedestal. You aren't able to truly connect with others because the people you're interacting with can't divorce you from your fame. Everyone else views and treats you based on the preconceived notion they have of you due to your notoriety. Because no ordinary person can understand what it's like to have so much power, you become completely unrelatable. This leads to cold, shallow, and impersonal connections that aren't as fulfilling as having a true human connection between equals. Satoru Gojo was born as the strongest sorcerer sorcerer in the world and never got a chance to develop in his life without that title. He was immediately swallowed up by the fame and esteem of his privilege. Therefore, he feels like he doesn't have an identity outside of being the strongest. Geto's words remind him that Satoru Gojo's personality wasn't developed through life experiences, since how could he ever experience all of the trials and tribulations of life when he was literally born perfect? Instead, he implies that Gojo is defined by his power alone, and there is no real Satoru Gojo underneath all of that power. He makes Gojo feel like he is nothing but an empty husk, a soulless thing, and that there's nothing more than his title of being the strongest sorcerer in the world. Gojo's loneliness peaks here, since not only is he losing the closest human connection he's ever had, but that person is telling him that there's no way he could ever have connected with anybody due to the circumstances of his birth, something he didn't know he was insecure about until that moment. Gojo has accepted that he is strong, but Geto surmises that his overwhelming strength, that limitless power, is all that he has in life. He feels like he is unable to form genuine human connections through shared understanding. The burden of his strength makes Gojo feel dehumanized. His inherent perfection means that he will never develop in fulfilling ways or find fulfillment in his life, since part of what makes life worth living is working to achieve your goals. The arrogance that he develops due to his strength could also be read as frustration towards everyone else for not being as strong as he is, and thus not being able to understand him. Behind that cocky attitude is a man struggling to find someone, anyone to connect with on an equal and personal level. Whenever he acknowledges someone as being weak, on the surface he's just insulting their strength. But on a deeper level, Gojo is stating that there's simply another person who can't understand him and another reminder of his loneliness. Throughout the story after his breakup with Geto, Gojo is constantly referred to by his strength and viewed solely by his title as the strongest. He stops being a person and becomes something more akin to a mountain, indestructible, indomitable, but completely unrelatable. Whenever someone refers to him as the strongest, whether that be a student, a friend, an enemy, or even himself, it is simply a reminder of Geto's words to him. It is a reminder that he will forever just be the strongest, and that he isn't anything more than his title, and that he will never be understood. The title that should be met with pride is now a burden and a constant reminder of his lonely place at the top of Jujutsu society. Being at the top means that you can do whatever you want, but what good is that when you can't find a single person in the world to relate to? And who better to relate to the loneliest sorcerer in the modern day than the loneliest sorcerer in history? Throughout the story, we have only known Ryomen Sukuna to be the ultimate antagonist, the strongest bad guy, and the pinnacle of power in the Jujutsu world before Gojo's existence. It was clear to anyone who read or watched JJK that a battle between Sukuna and Gojo is inevitable, or at least a battle where Sukuna didn't have just one finger. I feel like it was through the battle of the strongest that Sukuna was able to save Gojo from his loneliness. I see how ironic it is to use the word save when describing what Sukuna does to Gojo, but in a way, their battle allowed Gojo to be treated as a human for the first time in his life. Somebody was finally able to treat him not as the strongest, but as an equal. There was a reason why in chapter 236, after Sukuna told Gojo he would never forget him, Gege Akatami decided to show Gojo's lifeless mouth in a half smile, implying that he died satisfied despite the shocking and sudden defeat. I feel like the most important line to convey the full meaning of their battle can also be found in that infamous chapter. As he's leaving the mortal realm, Gojo is depicted at an airport, which is a perfect use of symbolism to show limbo, a waiting place to get to your final destination. He talks to Geto about his fight with Sukuna and reflects on his life and the strength that defined it, saying this line: "You can make a flower bloom, you can admire it, but you can never tell the flower I want you to understand me. This quote is accompanied by the image of a lotus flower, a symbol commonly associated with the Buddha and represents the enlightenment that he achieved after fighting Toji. This is yet another piece of imagery used to emphasize Gojo's divine status amongst all of Jujutsu society. The panel that precedes this line lets us know that Gojo doesn't feel lonely in a physical sense since he has his friends and students around him, but existentially there's a line that separates him from the rest of the world. No amount of company or friendship can overcome the solitude that comes with existing on the other side of that line. This is why Sukuna was the only person who was able to reach across that line. Finally, Gojo met someone who could truly empathize with him. The King of Curses was described as an unstoppable calamity among other impersonal descriptions. Much like Gojo, he was never viewed as a person but more like an inhuman representation of strength. He too was viewed as nothing more than his title. Sukuna at his core is a hollow and empty sorcerer with no true purpose for his existence. We are shown this characterization through the two motifs that follow Sukuna constantly: love and eating. When he was confronted with Yoruzu's one-sided, shallow, and comical idea of love, Sukuna said this line: I have much more to teach you about love and the ultimate strength and solitude it brings. This line returns a few more times when Sukuna confronts Gojo. It pops up when Sukuna agrees to the 1v1 with Gojo, and once again when Gojo is at the airport following his defeat. But what is love to Sukuna? From his words to Kashimo in chapter 238, love seems to be when someone truly challenges you on your level. Sukuna ran into the same problem as Gojo since he is so far above everyone else that finding this love was essentially impossible. Sukuna says that while he understands love, he believes that it is worthless and he rejects it. The King of Curses completely accepted his role as a living natural disaster. Sukuna called strong sorcerers like Gojo and Kashimo greedy for wanting more than their solitude. It seems that Sukuna believes that once you become the strongest, you stop being a person and your whole existence is dictated by your basic desires and nothing more. Hence why Sukuna uses a lot of cooking and eating motifs in his language. Unlike love, eating is a basic and primitive desire that requires no deeper thought or connection beyond consuming and moving on. Sukuna says to Kashimo right before dismantling him that he will live by his nature, consuming whatever he feels like and destroying whatever is in his way. The only reason he gives for doing the things that he does is that devouring people is simply a fun way to pass time until death. This is all that Sukuna has in his life, one meal after the next, on and on until he stops existing. Sukuna lives a gluttonous life where nothing matters other than his next meal to placate his boredom and solitude. If you think about it, that's a very depressing existence, to not have any goals, achievements, or love that you strive towards. However, I don't think he chose this lonely path out of his own volition. Despite claiming that he doesn't have any ideals or passions beyond his innate hunger, Sukuna finds himself incredibly irritated watching Yuji's persistent tenacity. Sukuna passionately hates Yuji the most because the young sorcerer's will is completely unbreakable. Yuji has ideals, connections, and love, which are all things that Sukuna removed from himself to become the strongest. And so, when the strongest sorcerer in history sees a child take those things that he views as weakness to use as motivation to beat him, this irks him. This gives us a hint that Sukuna's rejection of love may not be so absolute after all. It seems like the solitude that Sukuna takes so much pride in may just be a facade, and that his hatred of Yuji may be the first crack in that facade. Sukuna continuously says that he rejects love while at the same time understanding what love is. It also seems like he is lying to Kashimo and potentially even himself when he says that love is worthless. Sukuna refuses to answer Kashimo when he asks him why he turned himself into fingers to be reincarnated in the future when all he wants to do in life is to eat meal after meal until his death. Perhaps Sukuna is still seeking that love, which is something he couldn't find in the Heian era. Just like Gojo, Sukuna is also the metaphorical flower that no regular human human could ever hope to understand. His cycle of eating and waiting until his death could be a result of the depression he feels from not ever experiencing that love. This could explain the gratitude and praise that he gives to Jogo and especially Gojo after he defeats them. While they weren't able to give him the love that he was looking for, they reminded him that it may be possible and he wanted to extend a piece of that love to them. The reason that Sukuna's line about love appears right before and right after his match with Gojo is to indicate that Gojo also understands Sukuna's version of love. He knows better than anyone the burden of being the strongest and the solitude that follows it. After achieving enlightenment and calling himself the Honored One, Gojo never had to try again. Much like Sukuna, he moved from one battle to the next, overpowering everything in his path with ease. Nothing felt fun for him, hence his arrogance and frustration. Overwhelming strength makes life boring when you win everything with no effort. Their battle showed Gojo what Sukuna's love feels like, and it is completely incomprehensible to anybody who hasn't held the title of the strongest. That love takes the form of a challenge. It is an actual obstacle you have to overcome and a goal that you have to give 110% of yourself to try to achieve. With Sukuna, Gojo was no longer treated like a mountain. He couldn't coast through this fight with ease. He had to give everything of himself and go even further beyond to fight Sukuna. During that battle, both of them temporarily escaped their solitude. They both stepped off their pedestals of strength and greeted each other as rivals. Sukuna versus Gojo was always going to end with one of them winning and returning to their lonely existence. Sukuna showed Gojo a version of his love, and Gojo understood this from his words at the airport. Thanks to Sukuna, Gojo was able to experience true equality for the first time in his life and had a reprieve from his existential loneliness by having someone truly understand him. This is why Gojo died with a smile on his face, and until he's defeated, the King of Curses will have to remain cursed with his meaningless, boring, and lonely existence, just continuing to eat to pass the time until his death. Thank you all so much for watching the video all the way to the end. Let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts on the video are and Gojo and Sukuna's dynamic as a whole. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time with more lukewarm takes.